This is the Bartholomew Town Podcast.
Okay, a very good evening to everyone out there from Providence. I'm Bill Bartholomew. Tonight, B-Town presents a roundtable with the candidates, the Democratic candidates in the upcoming special election for the Senate District 3 seat that has opened. We have 5 candidates here, all of the candidates in this Democratic primary here with us tonight, and we'll get it going with a brief intro beginning with Brett Jacob.
Everybody, thank you, Bill, for having us, and thanks to my fellow candidates for making the time for this. My name is Brett Jacob. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm thrilled to be running in the Senate District 3 special election. And I'm thrilled because I love Rhode Island, but also really proud of where I come from. You know, my mom only had a high school education, and that really limited the opportunities that she had to provide for us. And when I was 11 years old, she was arrested. But through that, I had people in my life, especially public school teachers, that believed in me, invested in me, provided opportunity for me. And if it weren't for a strong public school education, if it weren't for those people in my life, I wouldn't be here today. And that has been the driving force of my public service, both in direct action in community service, but also in my work as Director of Research and Development for the City of Providence, where I focused on designing and implementing a series of policy reforms that focus on advancing racial and economic justice, particularly as they relate to public safety. And through my work in the city and through my direct action, I've had the chance to build a robust network of folks in the state. And it's my hope to take this practical yet progressive policy experience, this network of folks that I have developed over the years doing direct service, and elevate that to the State House, because the issues that we are facing as a state are complex and they're intersectional. And we're going to need all tools at our disposal to tackle them, particularly as we look at the deteriorating condition of our public schools, and certainly as we look at the challenges that students face when they're trying to learn, particularly homelessness for children or lead poisoning, folks showing up to school with lead poisoning, and food insecurity. These kinds of challenges take someone who has the lived experience addressing them, and also the practical experience implementing policy. And certainly none of this is going to... certainly all of this falls on the backbone of recognizing we have a climate crisis that is not happening tomorrow. It's with us right now. And our approach to addressing these complicated policy challenges will require also addressing the climate crisis.
Thank you, Brett. Ray Rickman.
Bill, thank you very much for inviting me. I'm former state rep for College Hill, East Side, Providence, 6 fabulous years. I was in the legislature at a time in which Democrats were almost as conservative as the Republicans. And it was my great luck to be a reformer there. It was my great luck to be productive when I was in the House. I wish to go back to the Senate because of the state of the Providence public schools. 23,000 young people need some help. The governor, former, took the public schools from the mayor of Providence, said that we were doing a lousy job, which was true. And now the state's doing a lousy job. It's sad. I hope this is a very interesting race in that it has all these candidates and people have surrogates and everything else. I'd like to ask people if they would go to my website and see who I am. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Ray. Gina?
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. My name's Gina Pham. I would be deeply honored to serve as our district's new senator. I am a public school teacher, and I was inspired to run for office by my students. They're deeply anxious and terrified of the rapidly accelerating climate crisis, and the corrupt establishment politicians who control our legislature are not doing nearly enough to decarbonize our economy, and they're failing to respond appropriately to the severity and urgency of this crisis. I'm tired of waiting for establishment politicians to care about my students. I'm sick of watching my students struggle in fear, and I'm going to the State House to advocate for them. Our legislature needs to take serious climate action, and I'm ready to fight every day to make sure that Rhode Island passes a bold and ambitious Green New Deal. And in addition to charging ahead on environmental justice, I'm excited to help repair our crumbling public education system that's failing our state students day in and day out. As a public school teacher, I know firsthand how appallingly underfunded and neglected our public schools are. And when I'm in the State House, I promise to fight to repair our public schools and ensure that every single student in Rhode Island is given the tools they need to thrive.
All right. Thank you, Gina. Councilman Zurier.
Thank you, Bill, for hosting this. And thank you all who are listening to this podcast. We are all candidates from the Democratic Party with a capital D, and this is an exercise in democracy with a small d. I have lived in Providence. I grew up here, went to classical high school, returned here in 1990 to raise a family and practice law. My classical experience made me passionate about public education. My children attended the Providence Public Schools for middle and high school. I served on the Providence School Board. I was part of a parents group that successfully advocated for the reopening of Nathan Bishop as a quality public school. I also started the first alumni association in classical high school, the first in Rhode Island to use private money to help a public school. In my service on the city council, I also worked on education, and I realized the difficulties that our city's finances have. My main goal in this candidacy is to ensure that our city of Providence continues to prosper, that we don't fall into bankruptcy because of our pension fund, and that we become a successful place or remain a successful place for people to raise a family. Providence has been very good to me and my family, and I have been trying to work in public service for many years to make that possible for other Providence residents. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Councilor. And Hillary, last but not least.
Thank you so much, Bill. Thanks to my fellow candidates for being here tonight, to you for hosting, and to everyone who is listening and watching, whether it's Monday night or later on in the week. So I am Hillary Levy-Friedman. I'm a candidate in the special election for Rhode Island State Senate to represent the East Side of Providence. So why am I running? I'm running because I believe that together we can take action for our community to achieve justice. And I'm the mom of two boys who are in elementary school. Every day I worry about them and their generation and future generations, thinking about the climate crisis. Every day I send them off to school. Not only do I worry about the pandemic and COVID and how we will balance all of those issues in our working household if they go into quarantine or get sick, I also really, really deeply worry about mass shooting happening at their school. And so these are just some of the issues that drive me every day in this race and have driven me already in many of the things that I've done in my life. So just to tell you a little bit more about me quickly, I'm a sociologist by training. I teach in the Department of Education at Brown University, and I've been driven by issues about inequality for my entire professional career. I've taught social policy and public policy as well. And I have previously been president of the Rhode Island chapter of the National Organization for Women, where I was really proud to be part of major coalitions that passed things like the Reproductive Privacy Act in 2019, other common sense gun legislation, Uniform Parentage Act, equal pay, the list goes on. So I know that we need leaders who are able to build bridges to really address the public policy issues that are facing our state in Rhode Island. And I know that I'm ready to be that leader. Thanks so much.
All right. Thank you, Hillary. So we begin our conversation tonight with a prompt based around an issue that is certainly in the center of conversation, and not only in terms of within Providence, but on a regional basis. And that is a combination, if you will, of violence in the city, police, and the perception that these issues have in terms of shaping Providence's role in the statewide economy. We begin this portion with Gina, and my question for you right now is, Chief Clement states that he needs 448 Providence police officers in order to enact the type of community policing that would, from their perspective, from the rank and file's perspective, ameliorate some of these challenges that the community faces? We obviously know that there are many large social construct issues as well. If elected, using the pulpit of Senator from District 3, what would you do to try to curb the issue of violence in Providence right now?
So I believe that we absolutely should not be hiring any new police officers. We need to be instead reinvesting in mental health services, social workers, drug overdose prevention. There's absolutely no reason that police should be asked to respond to mental health crises or drug overdose prevention. They're not trained to deal with those crises, and social workers are. We need to be investing in the workers who are actually properly equipped to address the problems that we face. And I'm in favor of very, very restrictive gun control policies, and that includes severely restricting who can purchase a firearm and entirely banning assault rifles. We also need to implement very, very restrictive background checks before allowing any guns to be purchased to ensure that dangerous people don't have access to exceptionally dangerous weapons.
Do you believe that most crimes committed in the city of Providence are committed with a legally acquired firearm?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, we move on in this same discussion, Hillary. Police reform, matching the 448 uniformed police officer request of Chief Clements, curbing the problem of violence in Providence and the perception that it creates.
So we definitely have a public safety issue in Providence right now in many ways. I can't tell you how many doors I've knocked in District 3 where people are upset about the dirt bikes and ATVs. I'm sure this won't surprise a lot of people, but dirt bikes and ATVs are currently illegal, and they should be treated as such. They're not safe on city streets for many different reasons. And so that's a good example where, we have a law in the books and it's not being enforced. That being said, there are so many ways in which we can improve our community and our policing policy. So I would love to see more funding continue to go to the Nonviolence Institute. Gina mentioned gun violence prevention, certainly one of my top issues. High capacity magazine ban is just at the top of the list, which would cover a lot of assault weapons as well. And we need to talk about both reforming and considering the repeal of the Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights. No police officer in Providence should feel like they can do whatever they want without any consequences. And everyone who lives here should feel safe in their community and not feel at risk when they're around police. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done here. We don't have a lot of time. We have to get it right. So we need to bring a lot of people to the table to have those conversations. But we can't do nothing. I mean, if George Floyd had been murdered in Providence, right? Like that police officer would have still been able to be paid, would not have had to go on administrative leave for very long. And so that's a major issue. So I know that we can do this work together if we really sit down and have these conversations. Should
the police force be raised to 448 officers, as Chief Clements indicated is necessary for effective community policing?
So look, I mean, I'm going to trust that that is an accurate number because of research that's been done, because of all these reports. And so we know that we need to find ways to make sure that the police are operating most efficiently. That could be increasing the numbers of officers to make sure that the department is able to function the way it should be. If a car is stolen, if a house is burglarized, et cetera. However, at the same time, we know that we are often calling on police officers to do work that perhaps they are not best equipped to do. So here I'm thinking about issues around a mental health crisis, right? That when you call 911, perhaps that call should not be dispatched to the police. It should be dispatched in another way. And so I want us to be talking about all of those options and not just one of them.
Thank you, Hillary. Ray Rickman, the issue of violence in Providence, policing, and the perception that it creates, the economic ripples that are there. Obviously, a single senator can't sculpt policy independently, but is there legislation you might put forth and your general opinion on how to get past this moment?
From about 1975 to 2010, 414 officers was the number. I don't know why it's jumped all of a sudden. but I'm not in favor of any increase in the number of police officers. I am in favor of that police department being dissected and reformed. Now, I'd like to have a new department, separate from the police, totally, of about 35 or 40 people to begin to deal with mental health, wraparound services for the entire community. We don't have such an institution. We need one. Secondly, I would like to see, and this is the first, one of the first bills. I have to be careful. I told someone earlier about my first bill because I've already drafted it. But I've been looking at this idea that we should have a 1-year moratorium on the purchase of guns in the state of Rhode Island. That's something the Senate could institute and send to the House and get passed.
For anyone.
You'd have an exception for a new police officer who needs a gun at home. So you always have to have an exception. But for the 1,058,000 of us, no new guns. Almost everybody who wants a gun has a gun. And if the legislature started looking at this, 10,000 people run out and buy another gun before we pass the law. We need to pause. Police department has been misbehaving for 100 years, and we've done virtually nothing about it. I used to be head of the Human Relations Commission, where on 4 or 5 occasions, police officers shot Black teenagers in the kneecap to keep them from running after committing crimes. I'm the only person here who has gotten a police officer indicted for shooting Paul Shabuli in the head and killing him. Emotionally, mentally disturbed 14-year-old who threw a bottle of spaghetti up against the wall, and a police officer killed him, and working with Denny Roberts, I got him indicted. Now, a police Bill of Rights and other such things came into place, and it collapsed. Now, we haven't talked about this, and I'll be brief.
Yeah, 30 seconds.
When Esserman was the head of the police department, we saw enormous improvements. And you can't even imagine what the police department looked like in 1980 versus what it looks like now. And it can be improved. Under this mayor, it has not happened.
Thank you, Ray. Same question for you, Sam. You're still muted. Okay. Oh, there you are.
So when Chief Clements says that he needs 450 officers, plus or minus, I take him at his word. I think he has an excellent record of public service, and he has a lot of credibility with me. We worked. Chief Clements was instrumental in bringing about the passage of the Providence Community Police Relations Act, which increased police accountability in the city of Providence. I believe that really the issue here, as far as police versus social workers versus the Nonviolence Institute, I don't think there are a lot of people in Providence who disagree that we need both and. We need more people who can help take police calls where the police aren't needed, but we also need police to deal with violent crime. And it comes down to, in my opinion, money. So if I were elected to the Senate, I'd be trying to find more money for Providence so that they could fund adequate public safety. One thing I see is that in Rhode Island, cities and towns get 27% of the tax revenue they would receive from tax-exempt properties if they were on the tax rolls. Whereas in Connecticut, next door, the share is 44% for state-owned property and 75% for colleges and universities. I don't know if Rhode Island would agree to go to Connecticut's model right away. But if we started approaching that, there would be more money for Providence. And it's only fair because our tax base is eroded by the tax exempts. And we could use that money to provide the type of public safety that I think all of us candidates would believe in. And I believe also the city's leaders would as well.
All right. Thank you very much. And Brett, on violence in Providence, police funding, and the perception that violence creates in terms of those who would like to come spend money in Providence, live here, et cetera.
Sure. is a really important question because every single person in the city deserves to feel safe when they walk in their neighborhoods. And right now, there is a perception from folks who feel that the uptick in violence is impacting them. But there's also the reality that the current system of policing also creates feelings of unsafety. And I think that we need to think about the question differently than how many officers, and we need to ask the question of what we're asking our officers to respond to. And the reality is that 4% of calls for service that come into the police department are for the most serious crimes around burglary, aggravated assault, murder, things like that. Which means there are 96% of calls that have the potential that they don't necessarily require a badge and a gun for a response. So I think that's the more critical question is what we're asking our police officers to respond to. And this is something that I've worked on in my time as Director of Research and Development. We have successfully secured funding and are ready to begin implementing in the next couple of months a behavioral health crisis response program so that people experiencing mental health crisis or maybe an overdose receive the care that they need from trained professionals instead of our existing law enforcement response. But the other question we need to think about is what are the impacts of our existing law enforcement response? So, we have right now the number one reason that people are arrested in Providence is for driving on a suspended license. And the reason we have so many suspended licenses is because of unaffordable court debt. And families still need to take their kids to the grocery store. They still need to go to school. They still need to go to a job. And they're forced between paying for those necessities and paying for their court debt. As a result, they get pulled over doing these everyday activities. And the only tools that are at our disposal right now are to arrest folks. And the driver's license restoration program that I've worked on is also set to launch next month, is intended to provide folks legal services to negotiate their court debt down, but also provide a pathway for folks to actually get their licenses back. So thinking about not just what we're asking our officers to respond to, but also what are the consequences of our existing law enforcement response. If the consequences are to arrest people, are to give them court summons, are to issue them fines, that has a negative impact and prevents people from being able to address their most basic needs. But if we're able to invest in alternatives, which I believe the General Assembly does have that opportunity, not just by taxing the 1% at a higher rate so they chip in more, but also we do have money that was allocated in the ARPA funding that was specifically designated for a behavioral health crisis response program for states. So,
10 seconds.
So I think by leveraging these resources, the General Assembly can incentivize municipalities to build alternative systems that address residents' needs and employ more restorative practices.
All right. Thank you all for those answers. Our next area is development and housing, which is something that obviously there's a housing crisis in Rhode Island. That's surface level information. Specifically, though, when it comes to District 3, Senate District 3, you're at once abutting and potentially even including what many call the new Providence in terms of development, in terms of economic generation, so to speak. Yet there's also a crisis, if you will, of Brown University housing spilling into lowercase a affordable housing. Just in general, how do we move forward with development in your specific district and then also in the city as a whole? And we begin this portion with, with Sam.
All right. Providence periodically updates its comprehensive plan. And that provides a broad-based grassroots opportunity to look at what the city should be like. And I think that the last plan was completed in 2011. There was one after that. I think there's been one done in the last 5 years. And that, I believe, is the correct way to look at the future of the city, to get people involved in a discussion facilitated by experts, and to address the new issues as they arise, but to do it in an orderly fashion. I might add, by the way, that once you have a plan like that, it's important to stay with it. And unfortunately, when Mr. Fain came in to build his tower, it was a direct contradiction of the way that comprehensive plan was set up. And I think the city council's overriding of the comprehensive plan was something that we should regret. There are plenty of ideas about how to increase affordable housing in the East Side and other neighborhoods, such things as accessory building units. I think they should all be considered with a broad-based discussion in which all the stakeholders have a chance to have their say.
Thank you very much. Should my question for each of you will also include, should taxation with respect to Brown University change? That's also for you, Sam.
Would you like me to continue on that, Bill, or do you want to move to the next?
Yes, I'll ask each of you that same question, and I didn't include it in my initial prompt. So, Sam, do you believe that taxation policy for Brown University should be changed?
Okay. The starting point is something called the Dartmouth College case, argued by Daniel Webster in, I believe, 1821, in which the United States Supreme Court held that a corporate charter granted, and I think Brown's was granted by the Crown, could not be changed without violating the Contracts Clause. With that said, there are opportunities to change the tax exemption in certain limited ways. In Connecticut, for example, they do not grant the exemption to property that is not critical to the university's mission. So the science library cannot be taxed, but the dormitories can be taxed. So I think that there's an opportunity to tax some of Brown's properties without violating the Constitution. I also think another part of the solution is to increase the state's reimbursement to cities and towns for tax-exempt properties.
All right. Thank you, Councilor. Hillary, on that same issue, housing, development, and taxation of Brown University.
That's a lot all in one.
Sure.
So of course we have Brown University in District 3. We also have RISD is another big, large nonprofit educational institution. And so let me be clear, no large nonprofit should be able to free ride off of city or state services, right? So in some cases, that is a pilot that's negotiated with the city itself. And like Brown in particular will be renegotiating that with the city of Providence coming up. I think it's really important to have those large institutions paying taxes and in many cases, paying more for whatever the new development is that's going up. I also think it's really important to work with those institutions to say these are specific needs, whether they're in the district or the whole city or the state, to say, what can we do together? How can we leverage what you do as a large nonprofit to improve the community for everybody? And so, as many people know, several years ago, Brown University in particular made a commitment to the Providence Public Schools that has not been fully honored. That was the previous president. The current president has started doing more, but we need to keep pushing and make sure that the promises that have been made are kept. And we know that there's a need, particularly in the Providence Public School District. And so it's very important to have leaders who can sit down and have those conversations and really push. On a similar note, we know, I live in this area that student housing is an issue. There are a lot of neighbors in District 3 who get very upset because rightly so, there's trash, there's loud parties. I can walk by and say, oh, there's that beer pong game that looks really fun. But when you live next door to it on a Saturday afternoon or evening, perhaps that's not the best thing for you or the best thing for your neighbors. So we know that, again, Brown in particular, but RISD as well, has been doing work to increase student housing. New dorm went up during the pandemic, actually. There's another dorm that's in development, and a building was recently purchased specifically for graduate student housing, although that's out of the district, but it is revitalizing a different important part of the city. So when students are out in the community because there isn't housing on campus provided in some way, that is driving up costs. And then beyond that, we know that there's in District 3 specifically, an issue of inventory, particularly for people who want to buy or purchase homes. And so there's a great article in this weekend's Providence Journal about the restrictive business practices in terms of construction and why Rhode Island is in such a different state from its neighbors that I think everyone should take a look at. And it would be something that the General Assembly truly can act on to make it easier for new home construction in particular, whether it's in Providence or District 3 or elsewhere in the state.
All right. Thank you very much. Brett, what do we do about affordable housing, both lowercase a and capital A, in your district? And what role should Brown University, and if you were in the Senate, what role should the General Assembly play in sculpting that?
Sure. First of all, I can tell you, as someone who has lived experience with homelessness as a kid, I can tell you that the simple answer to why Mom and I didn't have a place to live was because there wasn't a place to live. And the very simple answer is that the state has federal funding available, and we can and should end homelessness in Rhode Island. And that means making bold public investments in housing. We've seen states and federal governments take the lead on this in decades before. And we just need to make these bold investments to make sure that those who are unsheltered or those whose incomes are completely strapped just paying for housing are prioritized in the development of housing. Of course, what's critical, particularly in our neighborhoods, is making sure that neighbors have some say in those developments. So I'm in favor, well, this would be a local policy, in favor of supporting community benefit agreements where, developers who want to come in and build new units have to, canvass the neighborhood and get feedback and consent the same way that we do as elected officials who want to make, as candidates for elected office who want to make decisions on behalf of our residents. And we cannot have this conversation about affordable housing without talking about the history of our largest nonprofits displacing Black communities and communities of color out of their neighborhoods. Brown University in particular is guilty of this during the quote unquote urban renewal period of the city. And so is Rhode Island Hospital. So when we think about what Brown University and these other large institutions can contribute, this should be top of their list. And I understand that the payment in lieu of tax agreements, the pilot agreements, are coming up for renegotiation. And while this is something that the city needs to take a leadership role on, it would be incumbent upon us as senators to really rally behind and support the needs that our residents are asking for, and really demand the sort of bold investment from our nonprofit anchor institutions that are required to address the myriad of needs that our residents need, and in part what they've caused.
Thank you, Brett. Ray, that same question.
So I like to be an honest politician. Our ability...
That exists?
Yes.
Okay.
I was one once before, Rodney Driver. I can name you a whole bunch of them. Brown University has fabulous lawyers and Supreme Court on their side. And our ability to tax them is limited. And their willingness to be fair about in lieu of taxes has not been award-winning. Now, people forget that the Providence Athenaeum and the Providence Art Club and Moses Brown and Lincoln and Wheeler and Providence College are all nonprofits the same as that one. And we don't want to tax them. So we need to be honest. Now, I have a piece of legislation. I was talking to a lawyer about it this morning. Sam, I will talk to you about it at some point. I'd like to tax endowments over $4 billion. Well, no one in the nation's ever done that. And it would take Brown 20 years to get to the Supreme Court and undo that tax. So in the meantime, we could have the money from it. Rhode Island Foundation's endowment's $1.8 billion. And the way they're going, they might reach $4 billion in the next 10 years. We'll tax them too. So that is one way to get at it. But let me tell you about the shame of this. The other day, I went over to the Barbara Jordan housing complex, 48 units, Rhode Island Housing is doing a disgraceful job. The city of Providence is doing a disgraceful job. 44 units sitting there, most of them triple deckers, empty, waiting. Disgraceful. So that should be dealt with immediately. There should be an investigation on why Rhode Island Housing has let that happen. And let me go to the next step with you, because we have this problem. We've had rich people, wealthy people, forcing middle class and poor people out of their housing in Providence for the last 30 years, in the West End, in College Hill, and the like. And that includes wealthy students forcing middle class people. RISD, we didn't mention. RISD forced 150 Black people out of their houses in the 1960s and 70s when they expanded the college. And Brown forced 400 or 500 Black people out of their housing when they expanded. These schools used to be little until after 1965. And they just had the power to drive working class and poor people out. I think I'm the only one. I am in favor of building housing for the rich. And if we can get them to put in 10% unit, that's, reasonable for working class people, we ought to do it. And we could mandate that. I am in favor of building some housing for the middle class and housing for people with very little income. Every time somebody wants to build housing for the rich, everybody complains. We had 2,000 new people in Edie Agello's state rep district, almost all of them wealthy. And that has relieved the pressure on the triple deckers that regular people can live in. We've got to come together and talk about how do we work our way out of this and quit talking about things that aren't going to happen.
Thank you, Ray and Gina, on development, housing, and taxation within your district.
So I'll start on affordable housing and then move on to the question of taxing Brown. When it comes to housing, I want to be very clear. We absolutely need to ensure that every single Rhode Islander has housing. I grew up in public housing, so I know exactly the impact that it has in our communities when we don't have enough affordable housing for them. And I know what it's like to be directly affected by our state's severe housing crisis. I know what it's like to be housing insecure. It's a deeply personal issue for me, and the housing shortage is a big part of why I'm running for office. And in order to address it, we need to build 10,000 green affordable homes for working families. And that definitely includes constructing lots and lots of units of green affordable housing on the east side of Providence. And on the east side, like the rest of the state, we have a severe shortage of affordable housing. The for-profit real estate development market is utterly failing. It's producing far too much ecologically unsustainable luxury housing and not nearly enough affordable housing that is affordable to ordinary working families around the state. We need to be investing heavily in producing green, affordable housing to correct this market failure. And that absolutely includes building green, affordable housing in the East Side. Additionally, we should immediately implement an eviction moratorium throughout the entirety of the pandemic. Nobody should be kicked out of their homes during a global health crisis. We also need to immediately implement statewide rent control. On the issue of Brown, I'm entirely in favor of dramatically raising taxes on Brown University. It's appalling how little they contribute in taxes to our city and our state. They benefit from being in our state and taking advantage of all the amazing things that Rhode Island has to offer, and they absolutely need to pay much, much more in taxes. It's important, it's also important to note that Brown has $4.7 billion in endowment, and they built their money on the slave trade, and they need to just pay more. They need to pay much, much more in taxes.
All right. Thank you very much, Gina. And we will stay with you for this next section, which I would expect answers could be between 10 and 20 seconds. And then we'll move on to our final area for tonight's discussion. How long have you lived in the district, and what's most important to you to bring your own perspective? I should rephrase that. What is the most important thing from your perspective that represents your district that you would bring to the General Assembly?
So I have been living in the district for a year and a half, which I know is shorter than the other candidates. But, I chose Rhode Island after having lived in many different cities throughout Massachusetts. I've been living abroad as well. And there's a reason why I chose Providence and why I'm choosing to stay here. I was actually really surprised when I moved down here. I'm from right outside of Boston. So people don't always say the best things about Providence up there, but I grew to really love it, love its community and culture, specifically on the East Side. And I think what I bring to the East Side, there's a few things. I'm a public school teacher. I'm out in the community every single day, and I know what my students are dealing with, what people on the East Side are dealing with. And also, I'd be the first Asian American in Rhode Island's General Assembly, and District 3 has the highest percentage of Asian Americans in the entire state of Rhode Island.
All right. Thank you very much. Ray, how long have you lived in the district, and what would you bring to the table in terms of personal perspective?
2 years in Fox Point, 40 years on the top of College Hill. I am an adopted son. I'm probably also the College Hill historian. I'm certainly the African American historian. I was listening to Sam talk about the Dartmouth case and the like, and I know that stuff. I got all excited. I thank you for this question, because we've not been able to talk about this. This is a time in which Black lives are supposed to matter, and I am the Black candidate in this race. And I worry about the Senate not having representation from its oldest, immigrant population. The first people were first, of course, and then Anglo-Saxons, and then African Americans. So I bring that. There's this fabulous line we took out of the journal that was written in 1995. And it said that Ray Rickman, more than anyone, has connected the East Side to the West Side. That's what I bring.
All right. Thank you, Ray. Brett?
Great question. I have been in Rhode Island for 10 years, and I've been solidly in the district for 6 of those years, on and off for 8. And, I think a lot about the conversations that I've been having on doors. And District 3 voters care about really big picture issues, right? Expanding reproductive healthcare justice, making sure we're making bold, swift investments in the climate crisis, making sure that our public schools are equipped for learning for students, not just in the buildings themselves, but also the lived environments, and making sure that we're advancing meaningful criminal justice reform. And these are big challenges that folks that I have talked to openly admit that aren't always challenges for folks on the East Side. So I think what's really important is that these are issues that folks care about. It's also important that the person representing District 3 has personal lived experience with many of these issues. And that's something that I bring to the table. But what I also bring is a practical experience of implementing progressive policy that addresses some of these challenges. So you need somebody that has lived experience and also knows how to bring others to the table to identify the shared values and objectives that we have, and really move the needle on progressive policy. And I'm fortunate to have done lots of community work, including as Mr. Gay Rhode Island, and that year-long service position has really provided me a strong network of people throughout the state that can be activated to help push progressive policy across the finish line if we're finding struggles in the Senate. And those are the things that I want to bring to the Senate if elected.
All right. Thank you, Brett. Sam?
I grew up on the east side of Providence, and I returned here in 1990 to raise a family. And from my time here, I've seen some changes which I think it made it more difficult to raise a family here on the East Side, and also more difficult for middle-class families to live on the East Side. I'm referring, of course, to our neighborhood's participation in the public schools. I went and looked up the U.S. Census data for my neighborhood on the East Side. And when I went through the public schools, 75% of families use the public schools. And now, when I checked in 2000, a minority of families send their kids to public schools from our neighborhood on the East Side. And they are unhappy about paying the tuition tax on top of their property taxes. These are families who themselves, the parents, went to public school. But it's much more than that. Public school is an opportunity for people from all across the city to share a classroom and be together. Our schools are becoming gated communities. And that is bad, not only for the students who are in the public schools where they're not receiving a quality education, but for the kids in the private schools who are not being able to get a social education from their peers. I was fortunate we had the resources to send our kids to the public schools and fill in the gaps, but we were able to do that with resources that the majority of kids in public school don't have. So to answer your question, what I would bring to this is a memory of what public education used to be in the city of Providence and a desire to restore that as effectively as possible.
And Hillary, thank you, Sam. And Hillary, how long have you lived in the district, and what specific perspective or experience do you bring to the table?
So I grew up in the Midwest in Michigan, and I came out east for college, and like others have lived all over the country and the world to pursue that education. But in 2015, my family chose to relocate here to Rhode Island, partly because I said, oh my goodness, this is the place when I visited that I said, this feels like home and where I meant to raise my family and where we're meant to set down roots. Love the mix of history and creativity and the independent spirit, not just in Rhode Island, but specifically in Providence and on College Hill and in the East Side more generally. So we moved here in 2015. I had a 1-year-old and a 3-year-old at the time. Our lives were very much centered in District 3, work here, kids go to school here and learn here, and now we live here. And so I just think about the weekend where my kids were off for the first time, had religious school since March 2020 at Temple Bethel here in the district. Son played soccer Saturday morning behind the Jewish Alliance on the fields, where so many parents have spent time for waiting for someone to actually hit the baseball, because everyone has to hit the baseball before we can all go home. So anyway, I'm having those experiences right now with my kids who, walk down the street and see so many friends that they know all the time. And for me, seeing so many neighbors and colleagues as I'm moving through the space and eating and out and socializing. So it's an amazing place to be. I do think because I have young kids, that's a very different perspective and experience and focus. And I love being so close to the State House. And again, when we could go up there, it was very easy to get there to advocate and be part of the democratic process. And I love that it's so close for my kids as well. They know that it's the people's house and their voice matters, and they get to share that with friends from many different parts of their lives as well.
All right. Thank you all for providing your specific, unique perspectives here. Okay. In this last prompt, if we could keep the answers to about 90 seconds or so, and I'll kind of put up my hand to try to indicate to wrap it up. I don't have the big light behind me, the wrap it up light or anything like that. One for time, but also just to keep it concise. And we'll begin with Ray Rickman here in this. Whether it's with the American Rescue Plan dollars that are available now and being distributed now, or any other mechanics, as a senator, what's the one cause that you would champion? And in, I guess, as succinct a way as you can explain, I guess, what would be your passion project and how would you get it done?
Well, I would like to see a great deal of this money spent on behavioral health. I'd like to see a great deal of this money spent on public schools. I'd like to clean up a couple rivers that are filthy, unusable. I would like, $1.2 billion is real money. But I also would like to see them set aside $100 million to look at our problems. We never do. The legislature just somebody puts up a bill and they pass it or they don't. We have a minority health program that is less than 1/4 of 1% of the health department's money. And minority folks, that's an old word, are 24% of the population. Do the math. We do stupid things in state government. We need to stop.
All right. Thank you very much. Gina, your passion project, how would you spend the American Rescue Plan dollars? And how would you get something done, whether it's climate or anything else? How would you implement these policies using your position if elected?
Well, definitely the Green New Deal. The most important issue we face right now is the very real prospect of complete and irreversible ecological collapse. And the climate crisis is absolutely terrifying. We have a rapidly closing window of time to address it, and Rhode Island urgently needs a Green New Deal. A big part of the Green New Deal involves expanding public transportation, electrifying all the buses. They need to be safe, they need to be reliable, and they absolutely need to be free. And when I'm in office, I'll work tirelessly. Sorry, I'm a little tired right now. It's been a long day. School was really long today. To shut down corporate polluters in frontline communities like the Port of Providence with a just transition for workers. Additionally, our state needs to invest in 10,000 green affordable homes for working families. And of course, we need to be building tens of thousands of wind turbines and solar panels, reducing utility bills for low-income residents, and rapidly decarbonizing our electricity grid. If we implement a bold Green New Deal in line with these policies, we can put Rhode Island on track to have 100% clean electricity by 2028 and become fully net zero by 2040. And we have the ability to help Rhode Island lead the country on climate change, and we have to take the urgent steps required to ensure that happens.
Do you get the sense that other members of the Senate would be on board with this plan?
No, I do not get the sense that right now that we have people on board with this plan.
All right. Thank you, Gina. Hillary, your passion project, American Rescue Plan dollars, and how would you get it done?
Well, it's really hard to pick just one thing because I see everything is systematic and connected and intersectional in so many ways. And for me, really, justice is in the details. But if I had to pick one thing that I think really captures so many of the issues that I care about, it would be using money, which would be a great bang for the buck, to invest in after-school programs. And so many schools cannot extend the school day, but we know how much learning takes place in those after-school hours in the space between home and school, which has been a real area that I've been dedicated to for the past several years. When we're thinking about that space, then we're covering issues around public safety and gun violence prevention. We're thinking about education. We're thinking about health. And I think all of those things are really connected with one another. And that's the perspective that I would bring and that I would love to really make a specific impact on, in addition to all the other issues that I know are important to District 3 residents, like the climate crisis and education and public safety and housing.
Yeah, thanks so much. So many issues. I mean, we could spend 7 hours here doing it, and you have certainly fleshed things out over the course of other debates or roundtables, if you will, but appreciate that very much. Okay, Councilor Zurier.
During the late spring and summer, I had the opportunity to work as a outside counsel to the Department of Administration to set up its program to run the American Rescue Plan Act. I was paid the munificent sum of $95 an hour. From that, I learned that I think it's not a good idea to view that money as free money that we can spend on anything we want. Instead, we have to look at what Congress intended when they sent the money to Rhode Island, and also how that's been implemented in Treasury regulations. The good news is that there are some very important things that we need to do that are right in the heart of what Congress intended. More specifically, they created four categories of acceptable uses of the money, making up lost revenue, addressing the coronavirus, premium paid for essential workers, water, sewer, broadband infrastructure. But with regard to response to the coronavirus, they went further and they said, if you use this money to address disparities from communities that have been adversely affected, you can use as much of it as you want on such projects as affordable housing and community development in qualified census tracts, which are high poverty neighborhoods. I think if we follow what Congress intended, we are going to actually have little choice but to use the money in that way, a large amount of that money, and that would be a very good thing. Affordable housing, and we could also use it for after-school programs in high poverty neighborhoods. We would just use that money to reduce the disparities that have been worsened during the coronavirus.
All right, thank you very much. And lastly, Brett.
It's a great question again, of course. And the priority that we need to have is on housing. There's a school of thought called housing first, which essentially means that you cannot, make good medical decisions for your family. It's difficult to engage in the workforce, and it's challenging to get a quality education, among other things, if you don't have stable, affordable housing. And again, speaking from personal experience, I can tell you that when Mom and I were homeless, I wasn't going to school, she wasn't working, and certainly, making medical decisions was not on the top of her mind. So in the immediate, we do have the opportunity. We have about 500 folks that are unsheltered right now. So in the short, immediate term, we can use ARP funding to continue hotel contracts to make sure that folks are off the streets and acquire more hotels if needed to make sure that folks have a stable place. In the meantime, we need to make those bold investments to incentivize developers to make affordable housing units that we can transition folks into. And in the long term, we need a sustainable funding source to continue the development of affordable housing that will come from increasing the tax rate on the top 1% of earners who make $475,000 or more per year. And we do this implementation. We have community partners that have had these ideas and have been championing these causes for a long time. And the key to getting this done is the Senate is finding that dime size piece of common ground that we have with our colleagues and building that relationship to make sure that they understand the benefits of this investment, how it will impact their constituents in a positive way and Rhode Island as a whole in a positive way. And starting from that place, I think that it is absolutely critical to build relationships with our current senators and also make sure that we're maintaining the relationships with the community partners on the ground who are doing this work every day to make sure that we spend these monies correctly and smartly.
All right. Obviously, so much we could have gotten to, but I think we got to a lot tonight, and each candidate did a great job of distinguishing themselves on certain issues. Thank you all for running for office, by the way, as a citizen of the state. That's in and of itself impressive and much appreciated. Brett Jacobs, Sam Zurier, Hillary Levy Friedman, Gina Pham, Ray Rickman. Thank you all so much. And for all of you out there watching or listening on Bartholomew Town, from Providence, I'm Bill Bartholomew. Good night.
Rhode Island's podcast of record, B-Town.
At HealthSource RI for Employers, we provide access to health insurance to more than 1,100 local businesses and nonprofits, and 96% of them renew through us every year. Maybe it's our choice of 19 different health plans, our 10 years of customizing solutions, or our one local team of dedicated experts helping employers find quality health insurance. See how our numbers stack up for you. Learn more at healthsourceri.com/employers.